Picture a campfire flickering in the dead of night, 30,000 years ago. The camp is suffocatingly quiet. Earlier this afternoon, the hunting party returned. They brought back enough meat to feed the entire group, yet by sunset, a portion of it had quietly vanished. This is the third time this week. Everyone sitting around the flames has the same suspect in mind. Let's call him Arthur. Arthur has been accused before. Provisions always seem to go missing whenever he lingers near the drying racks. Bitter arguments trail behind him like shadows. The group has tolerated his behavior for months, but tonight, the air is thick with a different kind of tension. Notice how nobody sits next to him. When food is passed around, it bypasses his hands. If he walks toward a conversation, the voices simply evaporate. Even the children instinctively step back. For the very first time, Arthur's eyes dart around wide and nervous. He realizes this isn't just about a few missing cuts of meat anymore. The tribe is silently deciding his fate. This scene brings up a profound question, one we rarely pause to consider. What exactly happened to the worst person in an ancient human tribe? Not the physically weakest, nor the least intelligent, but the chronic liar. The thief. The individual nobody. In our modern world, if someone breaks the social contract, we have a vast apparatus waiting for them. Police forces, courthouses, concrete prisons, and thousands of pages of written. For the vast majority of our history as a species, absolutely none of that existed. And yet, human groups survived and functioned flawlessly. Cooperation is incredibly fragile. A single person who takes far more than they give can rot a community from the inside out. So, what was the protocol when somebody like Arthur became a genuine liability? The reality is far more chilling than most people guess. The ultimate punishment wasn't a physical act inflicted upon them. It was everything that suddenly stopped happening. To grasp the weight of this, you have to understand the sheer magnitude of human dependency in the ancient world. A person today can live a highly solitary life in a bustling metropolis like London or New York, rarely speaking to a neighbor. An ancient human simply could not survive alone. A fractured leg could permanently end a hunter's ability to track game. A minor scrape could fester into a fatal infection. A stroke of bad weather meant starvation. Even with the relentless support of a tribe, life was brutally hard. Without that help, the world became a death sentence. Most of these prehistoric communities were intimate circles of perhaps 40 individuals. You knew every single. Relentless workers commanded deep respect. Those who shared built unshakable bonds. But the liars, the cheats, and the instigators forged reputations that were inescapable. There was your reputation was your shadow, clinging to you every breathing second. This forged a complex dilemma. How do you handle someone who endlessly fractures the group's trust? The immediate reflex is punishment. Just remove them. But banishing a healthy adult came with a steep. Every individual was an asset. Hunters tracked down the calories. Gatherers knew the intricate maps of seasonal plants. Elders carried decades of critical survival blueprints in their memories. Erasing Arthur meant erasing whatever scattered value he still possessed. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have documented a fascinating dynamic. Many of these groups operate beautifully without any formal authority. No chief sits on a throne. Yet, cooperation thrives. Why? The secret lies in reputation, and more specifically, in gossip, not the trivial, mean-spirited whispers we think of today. This was survival data. Information is power. Who shares their water? Who causes needless friction? Who steals? In a tightly knit band of 40 people, that data transmits like electricity. Gossip aligns the group. It acts as a mirror, helping individuals realize that others are noticing the exact same toxic behavior. Arthur might believe he is cleverly stealing from just one family. In truth, he is bleeding out his relationship with the entire camp. Watch Arthur sitting by the fire. Nobody is screaming at him. Nobody is raising a weapon. The hostility is entirely silent. People just drift away. Favors dry up. He isn't asked to help fashion tools. Small, everyday acts of mutual trust vanish into thin air. It begins with minor slights. Then, one morning, the hunting party leaves without waking him. Nobody asks for his insight on where the herds are moving. The terrible realization slowly washes over him. Nobody is glad to see him return to camp. Technically, he is still sitting within the perimeter of the tribe. Socially, he is a ghost, drifting further and further from the warmth of the fire. And that isolation was precisely the mechanism at work. Evolutionary psychologists argue that our ancestors evolved in an unforgiving landscape where social acceptance was a literal currency of survival. Bankruptcy meant death. This brings us to why do we feel embarrassment? Why do you lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying an awkward social misstep from 5 years ago? Why does your stomach twist into tight knots over a mistake that was over in 10 seconds? It feels like an agonizing overreaction until you look at it through the lens of evolutionary survival. Shame and embarrassment are our internal alarm bells. They aren't warning you about physical danger. They are warning you about social danger. Just as searing pain trains you to pull your hand away from a hot stove, the crushing weight of shame trains you to avoid behaviors that degrade your standing. In the community, neuroscientists have mapped this out. When you experience social rejection, your brain lights up in the exact same regions that process physical trauma. Your biology is screaming that you are in mortal danger. Picture losing the absolute trust of the only 40 human beings you know in the entire world. You lose your access to communal food, to the warriors who watch the darkness while you sleep, to the hands that will carry you if you fall. Social rejection isn't a ruined weekend. It is a blaring siren of impending doom. Because humans were pre-programmed with this agonizing fear of isolation, prehistoric societies rarely needed brutal laws. The threat of withdrawing acceptance was usually enough to keep people in line. Sometimes, simple mockery did the trick. If a hunter brought down a massive beast and started acting arrogant, the tribe wouldn't shower him with praise. They would joke that the meat looked a bit stringy, or the animal was probably already dying. They weren't being cruel. They were deliberately preventing one ego from eclipsing the group. Cooperation shatters the moment one person believes they are above the rest. When relationships did fray, the group poured immense energy into stitching them back together. Disputes were aired out in the open. Restitution was expected. The ultimate goal was never to inflict suffering. It was to restore the harmony of the unit. But what if the repair failed? What if Arthur just kept lying, kept hoarding, kept tearing at the fabric of the tribe? We often imagine a scene of prehistoric brutality, and while anthropologists note that groups would occasionally unite to eliminate a genuinely tyrannical, violent threat, the average chronic troublemaker faced a much colder execution. Imagine waking up to an icy reality. Your hunting partners look right through you. Trading a simple tool feels impossible. Other families aggressively keep their children away from yours. There are no chains. There are no cages. But the invisible walls are closing in. We know the devastating toll of loneliness on mental health in the modern world. Now project that loneliness onto a Pleistocene landscape crawling with apex predators, where food is scarce and disease is a constant shadow. This slow freezing out eventually culminated in the harshest sentence of the ancient world: exile. To a modern ear, exile sounds relatively mild. You pack your bags, leave town, and head somewhere else. But ancient humans possessed no such luxury. Being told to walk away from the fire meant abandoning the very architecture of your survival. You were leaving behind the eyes that watched your back, the hands that gathered medicine, the voices that kept the profound darkness at bay. Some scholars argue that banishment was psychologically far more agonizing than a swift death. Death is an absolute end. Exile is a waking nightmare where you are forced to combat the entire hostile world completely alone. And our species was never designed to be alone. We conquered this planet not because we had the sharpest claws or the thickest hides. We succeeded because we cooperated. One human is vulnerable. A coordinated group is an unstoppable force of nature. This brings us full circle to a beautiful yet somber truth. The worst person in the tribe wasn't immediately cast into the dark, because humans are desperately valuable to one another. The tribe wanted to fix the bond. Looking back at Arthur, sitting nervously under the starlight, we can envision how his story concludes. Perhaps the crushing weight of the silence breaks him. Perhaps he finally understands that every stolen scrap of food is paid for with the only currency that matters: trust. Maybe the camp forgives him, but regardless of the final verdict, his true punishment didn't begin with an official decree. It began the very second his people stopped seeing him as one of their own. That ancient fear still courses through our veins today. Thousands of generations later, we are still terrified of being left out. We dread rejection. We ache to belong. That lingering anxiety is a ghostly echo from a world where losing your tribe meant losing your life. What our ancestors feared wasn't a prison cell. It was the empty patch of dirt beside them at the campfire. It was the deafening silence when they walked into a room. For hundreds of thousands of years, to belong was to live. And the most terrifying fate wasn't physical agony. It was staring out into the absolute blackness beyond the firelight. realizing that nobody had your back and you were utterly alone.